Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the weekend review for July 19th through the 21st, 2019. I'm a little bit late today. I was down in Atlanta. I just got back, but I wanted to do a quick show so we could talk about The Lion King and how well it did this weekend. Coming in number one, obviously. So we'll do a deeper dive on Lion King, walk through the rest of the top 10, see what's going on limited. We had one really limited breakout this weekend that I want to talk about. And then we'll see what's going to happen here for the rest of the summer, because we are getting closer to the end of the summer. Once we get to the second week of like August, it feels like it's pretty much over. So we're getting close to that. So let's do this. So number one this weekend was, of course, Lion King. $185 million is the current estimate. Although there's a lot of chatter online that usually estimates come from the studio themselves. In this case, Disney is saying 185. Rival studios, according to Deadline, are saying it's probably going to come in higher, like 187, maybe even 190. But for right now, the number is 185. Actuals do tend to change a little bit, but not usually that much. So I think 185 is a pretty good number to go with right now for the weekend take on Lion King. Now, where does that stand in terms of tracking and overall perspective here? Obviously, it's a massive, massive number. 185 for an animated film like this is just kind of bonkers. But there's always this weird context going on with these movies. So going into the weekend, tracking was looking at about 180-ish to 200. They narrowed it down to like 180 to 195, I think. So it's right in that range. So it's a good, it's kind of exactly what people had expected. The issue is that, not really an issue, but there was a lot of hype happening this week saying 200 easy, 200's a lock, 200's going to happen. And that just didn't really materialize. Not that surprising that happens. You're thinking Lion King. I don't think there's been a more hyped movie over the last couple of years than this movie. So, yeah, I could see an expectation that it does do 200, 210, 220, and on higher. But I think Avengers Endgame really has spoiled us on some level. When that broke the record by $100 million, it sort of reconfigured our mindset when it comes to predicting big movies like this. So like people tend to over predict what something like The Lion King is going to do. Now, this is one of the biggest movies of the year. It's a huge property. It's probably going to be the biggest Disney remake of this whole set that they started. I don't even know when they started this whole remake thing. This was maybe Jungle Book. And the success of Beauty and the Beast, basically they greenlighted everything after Beauty and the Beast opened to 174, which was absolutely bonkers when that happened. And nobody expected that level of performance out of that movie. So there was a lot riding on Lion King here, coming in at a huge total. And I think it's, 185, you can't really argue with it. I think it's top 20 all time, maybe openings. I had to double check and see where it is on the all time list. But it's a fantastic opening, and it's a huge win for Disney. It's number 9 all time on the opening weekend's records, domestically at least. It's just above Incredibles 2, which did 182 last summer, which was kind of insane. And then it's just below Avengers Age of Ultron, which did 191. And it might, obviously it might pop up higher when actuals come in tomorrow afternoon. So let's talk a little bit about the reception to the film and sort of dive as deep as we can on this. So there was a little bit of concern about 2 weeks ago. I think it was when reviews started to drop for Lion King. Critics savaged the film. They absolutely hate this movie. Kind of in the same way they didn't like Aladdin, but it felt a lot more, almost personal with Lion King. If you look at the Rotten Tomatoes score overall, is a 54%, which is terrible, which is not good. And the reason I say that is compare that score to like the average MCU movie, which is like in the 80s or even 90s with critics, and that's top critics. These are like film snobs. People went to school for film, and they go to an MCU movie, Captain Marvel, are like, yeah, this is great. I love that. That's like and it gets like a 90. Spider-Man: Far From Home has a 90%. Toy Story 4 has a 98% Rotten Tomatoes. These are all critical scores. Lion King's not even close. It's right in line with Aladdin, which did 56% with critics on Rotten Tomatoes, and Lion King's a little bit below that on 54. It's even worse though if you look at top critics. Top critics, and this is like 42 people are considered top critics of the like 200 who have reviewed this movie. They give it a 36%. So it's almost like the more established the critic, the less they like this movie. And the main criticisms are it's a direct remake. There's nothing really new here. The animation seems odd. The voices don't really sync up to the animation of the animals themselves. There's not a lot of emotion because it's so photorealistic. They make them look like real animals. So there's not a lot of emotion that you would get in like the animated version. So I think a lot of the reviewers are like, this is like that weird uncanny valley. It really is like a postmodern essay that like Derrida or like any of those guys would have loved to have written about this. How it's like, and of course it's not only just a remake, but it's like this photorealistic remake of an animated film. It's like a postmodern wet dream. In any event, that's why critics hate it, because all those people know all about that critical theory, and they see this thing and they're like, this is the end times essentially movie of basically they're saying is like cinema cannot go this way or we're all doomed. So those people hated it. Normal critics overall also didn't like it, 54%. Audiences love it. 89% verified audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. The rating's also super high for that too. 89% Rotten Tomato score, but 90% actual rating, which is fantastic. All audience scores 85% fresh, and then 87 out of 100 as the actual score. So from those two data points, critics hate it, audiences absolutely love it. Same exact story as Aladdin. Cinema score is an A. They loved it. Post-track was an 80%. Very high, very good. There was a weird sort of like discrepancy between, I think, like parents and kids on Friday night or something, but I think that sort of evened out when they took more data. No definite recommend score yet. That deadline is posted from Post-track. But, it's probably 70 to 80% definite recommend up in there. Letterboxd is a little bit lower. Again, different demographic, more kind of in line probably with the film critics. 60 out of 100. You compare that to the original Lion King, 1994. That sits at 86 on Letterboxd, which is like the highest you could probably go for an animated film. Aladdin kind of has Aladdin has a lower, and I was surprised by that. Aladdin has a lower score on Letterboxd, the 1992 version, way lower than Lion King. I thought they'd be close to being even because I always thought that like those two movies were kind of considered the same tier, but they're not at all. But as the film snobs, I call them. So the original Aladdin had 68. Aladdin 2019 is a 66, both higher than the current score for Lion King 2019. Beauty and the Beast remake got a 64. The original got an 80. So Beauty and the Beast came out in 1991. Aladdin came out in 1992, and then Lion King followed up in 1994. I mean, that was like the heyday. I don't know when Little Mermaid was, but that was like the heyday of Disney animation. And kind of, I don't even know what phase of the company that would be, but it was like this wave of really successful animated films that are now getting sort of the rehashed, not even recut. I mean, they're like soft reboots, or they're reboots. I don't even know what you would call it. They're not sequels necessarily. And we got more coming. We got Mulan. We got Little Mermaid just got cast. And so, overall they've been super successful, and that's why they're going to keep doing them. Like if you look back on when this stuff started, it's been going on for a while. But like Box Office Mojo calls it Disney live action reimaginings. They count Lion King back in 1994 as the first. But in this current crop of films, I think it really started with Alice in Wonderland in 2010. That opened up 116, closed out at 334. That was March 2010. That was hugely, wildly successful back then. Then you had Oz the Great and Powerful in 2013. That less so, opened at 79, closed at 234. Not a terrible performance, but not amazing. Cinderella then in 2015, 67 million. Opens, closes out at 201. Good performance. But Jungle Book's where things kind of like really kick off again. 6 years after Alice in Wonderland, has a pretty similar run. Opens at 103, closes out at 364. I remember really following that Jungle Book opening, and 103 just seemed like it seemed kind of insane that it would open that high. And now here we are talking about 185 like it's nothing. Only 3 years later, by the way. God, 2016 seems like it's forever ago. And then you had Allison Through the Looking Glass also in 2016, that May. And that was an absolute debacle. Opens at 26, closes out at 77. One of the biggest bombs of that year. They must have lost hundreds of millions of dollars in that movie. Pete's Dragon, a little bit smaller one, also that year, opened at 21, closed out at 76, almost identical to Alice in Wonderland, the second one. That's insane. Beauty and the Beast then was another, the best performing so far live action reimagining for Disney. That opened up in March 2017, opened up at 174. And like I mentioned, I was doing the show then, and like I couldn't even believe it when the numbers were coming in, because it just didn't really compute or make sense to me that it would do that well. That one closed out at $500 million, $504 million domestically. Internationally, I think it had an amazing run too. What did it do international? 1.2 billion internationally for Beauty and the Beast back in 2017. And then it's been kind of, there were a couple misses. I guess one miss, Dumbo, this year in 2019. They waited 2 years. That's interesting. They waited 2 years. There's a lot of sort of, I guess, talk that Disney is stacking this year so that when Disney Plus, their streaming service, goes live in November, that they'll have like Dumbo's going to hit, Aladdin's going to hit, and then Lion King's going to hit. And so it's really going to help with their subscribers. Now they're basically going to be at war with Netflix for the next decade. So this is a good way to start off a good way to start off the first battle. And Aladdin, of course, did so well earlier this summer already. Opened up at 91, cruising to 340. I mean, it's already up to the Jungle Book level, Alice in Wonderland level, so it's that top echelon. And then we have the Lion King, 185. Where's this thing gonna go? If you look at legs, how do you even guess legs for a movie like this? It's so hard, because you do kind of feel that because the hype really is pushing this opening weekend a lot higher than perhaps a normal movie, so it's probably not going to have your normal 3.5x children's film, beloved children's film multiplier. So I don't know. I think maybe 3x is asking way too much. Probably like 2.7 would be a good guess for this. So right about $500 million, $500 million. The question is, does it beat Beauty and the Beast? Based on the critical scores, and I kind of have to go against what the audience is saying right now, but like I think the critics are onto something with the criticisms of the film. I don't think it hits 500 million. I think it comes in, actually, even though it opened about 11 million over Beauty and the Beast, I think it actually comes in below Beauty and the Beast. I don't think it's going to have the strongest legs. Just for a lot of reasons. Like, the quality doesn't really seem to be there. That doesn't mean that people aren't enjoying it. They are enjoying it. They're loving it. Look at the verified audience scores. But is it a movie that people are going to go back and see over and over again? I mean, they're doing that with Aladdin, so maybe it happens in this one. I mean, Aladdin right now, if you look at Aladdin, it's at, 340. What's its multiplier? It's already at a 3.7 multiplier. So I don't think Lion King's going to have that. Also, I think Aladdin has taken some of that gusto out of Lion King, and I just don't think it's going to have a massive multiplier. My guess would be probably closer to a 2.625 multi. So you're looking at like 162. I say it ends up about like 175 would be my guess domestically. Internationally, it's going to be huge. It'll make $1 billion. It should break $1 billion internationally. In terms of who showed up this weekend for Lion King, 53% female, 47% male. That's pretty significantly over-indexed on female audiences. Normal movies, 53% male, 50% under 25, 50% over 25. In terms of the audience, that's way over-indexed on the younger folks, which makes sense. What is it usually? I don't even know. It's like 66 something, 33 or something like that. So way more young folks seeing this movie. Sort of the racial ethnic breakdown demographics here: 42% white. That's pretty far below normal. Usually it's about 52%, 53%, somewhere in that range. Latinos right in line with normal, about 23%. African Americans way up. Usually 12% of a movie going on, and it's here they're 22%. Also with the Asian other category, that's about double what it normally is. So that's the breakdown there. Deadline says, it was strong everywhere, but really played quite well in the West and in the South. And they called out a good call out there. They do a lot of work with the social media analytics from Relish Mix. And so they did a lot of analysis on that part. I mean, the thing that pulled out to me was that like the viral video rate for the trailers and stuff was 35-1 versus the normal 13-1 ratio. So, I mean, it's one of those movies that everybody saw as a kid. And the moment they announced it, people were like flipping out about this. They were so excited. And so all this sort of makes sense that it's doing this well. I will say, though, there's no sort of like negativity around the opening whatsoever. People thought it was going to go to 200 million. The question is why. That's a big question that maybe we should ask. Is like, why didn't it break $200 million? These Marvel movies, Black Panther, Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, these huge, massive movies, just Jurassic World, cruise past $200 million. Avengers the original as well. So you're gonna have the one, like, this is probably one of the biggest properties that Disney has, and you kind of gotta ask, like, why didn't this break that $200 million mark? And I think the thing that sticks out to me was that, like, and I'm not saying it's a disappointment, I'm not saying I don't even say it's an underperformance. I'm just kind of asking that question, why it wasn't a $250 million movie or a $300 million opening weekend. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, there just wasn't a newness factor here. This is almost 100% nostalgia based. They didn't really seem to do that much different with the film. It's essentially just like a new layer of skin on top of the original. Obviously they have new voice actors and stuff, new singers and stuff like that. So it's not all the same, but it's all like essentially the same script. So it's a weird sort of like performance artist, like weird sort of take on the original. It's just like, I don't know what you would call it. It's like nostalgia pastiche or something, something like that. I don't know. I don't even know what the official term would be for a movie like this besides a remake. But there just wasn't a ton new done with it. It wasn't like The Thing was a remake, right? And that was like a completely different movie that was insane. And it's one of the best sci-fi movies ever made. It really took the source material and just ran with it. That didn't happen here. Like, this is just a carbon copy of the original. And so that's why I don't think it obviously had insane hype, but it didn't have the type of hype where it becomes like a feeding frenzy, and that's where you get the $200 million opening or the $357 million opening of Avengers Endgame. It just did not have that. But I do think it's going to play strong. It's pretty much wide open here for the next couple of weeks. I think studios really overestimated how much this was going to gobble up the space of the movie. I think by next weekend there's runway for new movies to be opening, but there's hardly anything opening. And so I think I don't think it's going to do $500 million domestically, but that doesn't matter. It's still going to be a huge win. They're probably going to make like $300 million, $200 million in profit off this movie easily. So overall, it's essentially a grand slam. It's kind of a grand slam. It's like Babe Ruth calling the shot. Like, we knew this was going to happen, and then it happened. So that's something I got from The Lion King right now. We'll keep following that one and look at the drop next week. In terms of drops next weekend, let's talk about that. Maybe probably an average drop. I don't see like a super low drop, probably like 50%. And then I think the drops will start to lower, just like it happened with Aladdin, where you might even see like 30% drops. But that all depends on how the general audience really reacts to the film. Everything I've seen, like the verified audience score doesn't lie, the cinema score doesn't lie, but a lot of the anecdotal stuff that I've heard from people is sort of like, oh yeah, it's either like, yeah, I really enjoyed it, or it was like, yeah, that was interesting, but like, I don't know why the hell they made that. That's what I'm seeing almost a majority of people saying. So I don't know if it's going to have those magical fourth, fifth weekend drops in the 20s and 30%. I don't see it. And that's why I don't think it's going to do 500 million. But yeah, so I'm going to say 50% next weekend, and then maybe like a 40% the weekend after, and then maybe 50%, kind of like ping-ponging back and forth in that range. Okay, so that was number one, obviously, Lion King. Number two is Spider-Man Far From Home on its third weekend, lost 53%, kind of a high drop, but Lion King lost 200 theaters. Per theater average is $4,700. Spider-Man Far From Home sits at domestically at $319. Internationally, it is up to $970 million. So that will break $1 billion this week worldwide. I mean, amazing performance. A lot better than I thought. Like, it just, Homecoming kind of got off to a slow start and then had like really strong legs all the way through like the 2-month mark. This one just had a really strong start, and I think it's just going to cruise past $1 billion worldwide. I think it's a big win, and for Sony, it's huge because now they got Venom, now they got Spider-Man's a super strong foundation of their sort of cinematic universe that they're making. So we're going to see another Spider-Man, we're going to see another Venom. They'll probably start maybe adding a couple more characters in if they have the properties to do so, and trying to create like a little shadow MCU over at Sony. But Spider-Man Far From Home basically assures that that's going to happen with that performance. Number 3 was Toy Story 4, only 5 weekends out from when it launched. That only dropped 30%. And maybe there was like a double feature going on with Lion King. That's the only thing I think, because that's an insanely low drop. That sits at 375 right now in its 5th weekend. Worldwide, you were looking at $859 million for Toy Story 4. So yeah, I mean, really good performance overall. Like I said, I talked about that one as kind of being seemed a little bit on the lower side. Opened to pretty far below even the conservative tracking on that, but it opened at 120. I think tracking on the low end was 140. But it sort of picked up steam here in the later weekends, and it's still the expectation here with an animated film from Disney. You get super strong weekdays during the summer, so it's just going to make up all that cash during the week and on subsequent weekends. So it's doing quite well right now. Okay, so that was number 3. Number 4 was Crawl. Decent drop for like a horror movie like this. 50% drop on its second weekend. Now sits at $23 million, almost $24 million here domestically. I think that's a good performance. Deadline tried to shit all over it last weekend. I just don't agree with that reading. Maybe they know something about the financials I don't, but I think this thing's going to get $30 million. I don't know what else would you expect for something like this. It was only shot for 13. I don't know. It seemed like a pretty good performance for me. Yesterday, continue with a really low drop. This has sort of been the word of mouth hit that's been going on. $5 million this weekend, a 24% drop, lowest drop in the top 10. Didn't really lose a lot of theaters, still in 2,600 theaters. Per theater average, somewhere around $1,900 in its 4th weekend. Not bad for a movie like this. I'm telling you, like, this is exactly what I said was going to happen. It sits at $58 million right now. Like, this thing isn't just going to keep printing money. It's a word of mouth hit. And, 60 is a given at this point. If it keeps having drops like this, maybe 70, maybe 75, maybe 80, 100 probably out of the picture. But I think Universal's going to be super happy with that performance if it hits, $65-70 million, which it should be able to. And it just goes to show you, yeah, they had the Beatles thing going on with it as well. That really helped it out. But I think honestly it was a marketing coup by Universal. It was like, because it's such a strange concept of a movie. They found a way to get older people to really get into it and be like, yeah, so he forgets the Beatles and then he starts singing Beatles songs. It'll make sense when you see it. But they had really good marketing on that, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's doing so well. Obviously, the quality of the film is what's making the word of mouth sort of spin as well. So number 6 was Stuber, DOA, 51% drop, $4 million, $1,300 per theater average in its second weekend, sits at $16 million. That one's not going anywhere. This one was kind of painted as like an orphan from Fox after Disney bought them up and the merger went through. So this one just seemed like it kind of got thrown out with the trash, and there wasn't really a super strong marketing campaign for it. Number 7 was Aladdin, another Disney movie from the 90s getting remade here, of course. Sitting at $3.8 million, 38% drop. I'm telling you, folks, these drops are insane. It's already the 3.7 multiplier, like I said before. Totally unexpected. The higher opening was unexpected, but this run is these like marathon legs that it's having. I don't think anybody saw at all. 340 so far domestically. Fantastic run for Aladdin. And it's going to continue to do well. Like, you got Aladdin, Toy Story 4, and Lion King. Who thought all 3 of these movies would be so successful in the same summer within essentially a 2-month period, all of them coming out at once? Disney, like I said, Disney's, basically priming the pump to launch their Disney Plus service, but it was a pretty big bet to put all 3 of these huge properties from the 90s back out there in the same 2-month period. And they won. They won big. Number 8 was Annabelle Comes Home from Warner Brothers New Line. This one somehow, again, like I was right about this, just printing money week over week, even though it didn't open huge, sitting at $66 million. For what is this, the fourth? Is this the 4th Annabelle movie? Wait a second. No, there's just Annabelle Creation, and then this one, right? So this is the 3rd Annabelle movie? Oh, I can't even keep track anymore. It's part of the Conjuring cinematic universe, of course. But like, this is why that's doing so well at Warner Brothers New Line. It's just they make a movie like this and it does $66 million. It's going to cruise to 70, no problem. I can't imagine. And the biggest part of the pay for this movie or production was getting Patrick Wilson to come back to play himself in this one. So yeah, I don't know. It's a very successful film on the smaller mid-size range, and anything over $50 million would be a huge win for this movie. The fact that it's going to hit 70, I think Warner Brothers is going to be besides themselves, and they're going to keep making more of these Conjuring Cinematic Universe movies. I don't know when Conjuring 3 is coming out. It should come out sometime soonish, I hope. But they're kind of running out of character. Like Annabelle's kind of been played out with this movie. The Nun was so bad. That was such a bad movie. So I don't think there's going to be a Nun 2. They do need some more offshoots to happen, though. Because the Conjuring main series, you can only do one of those every 3 or 4 years. Okay, so speaking of horror movies, Midsommar at number 9 now, dropped 56%, lost 1,600 theaters. So it reached that 2-week contractual obligation and now has lost 1,600 theaters. 22.4 million. I've been kind of shitting all over the movie not doing so well, but I looked at that number today. I was like, you know what? That's not so bad for what it is. It's a gonzo, absolutely insane art horror film. $22 million. I don't know. It doesn't seem that bad to me anymore. Now, I think that there's a thought process that maybe this could break out and do $40-50 million, but kind of based on the performance of Hereditary. But this one's, it's too weird. I mean, Hereditary is weird as F. This is like to the nth degree craziness in this movie. And I see a lot of horror films. This is one of the most nuts things I've ever seen in my life. I mean, really interesting. I can't even call it a good movie either. It's just like very visceral and interesting to watch. It's certainly a roller coaster. And the fact that has made $22 million, you know what? I'm going to call it a win, because what they have in their hands is something that Midsommar would have been banned in the 80s. There's no doubt in my mind, or the 90s, like the UK had the Video Nasties list where they banned movies, the censor board, I guess it was the BBC, or BFI, probably British Film Institute. I think that's who did it. But they had this whole list of films that they would just ban because of violence or gore. This would have been banned in a heartbeat. I mean, it's absolutely insane. So, $22 million, can't argue with that. 10th is Secret Life of Pets, somehow still hanging on in its 7th weekend, sitting at $151 million. Again, talked about this one at length. Terrible performance compared to the original. Obviously didn't cost a ton to make, though, so at the end of the day, it's probably a little bit of a loss or a push. Probably a loss for Universal, just because it's so far underperforming the first one. And I don't think we're going to see a Secret Life of Pets 3. So that is the top 10. Kind of quickly ran through that just because, it's late and I'm tired. So the other thing a couple things outside the top 10. Let's talk a little bit of The Farewell. Keep your eye on The Farewell. This thing is doing A24. It's about a Chinese family that essentially lies to their elder grandmother who is about to die. I don't know why. I think she has cancer. And I think they create like this fake wedding that they're going to kind of like say goodbye and send her off, but they don't tell her that she's dying. It's a really kind of interesting premise. Did really well on the film circuit, festival circuit. It is crushing in limited. It did over 80K per theater on its platform release. That's the New York, Los Angeles release, 4 theaters. Anything over 50 is really fantastic, but when you're pushing into 80, that is pretty astounding performance on that level. Doesn't mean it's going to break out. No. I always cite Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs made over 100K per theater in a platform release and then basically hit a brick wall when it went wide. Well, a wide release out to like Omaha and San Antonio. And people are like, what is this, a play? It's not a movie. And they're right. It's not really a movie. It's essentially a teleplay. But in any event, so Farewell's doing quite well. They expanded it more here, added 31 theaters, so 35 theaters total. 33K per theater and 35 theaters. It's really strong. And so I think it does have a chance. It's going to keep expanding. And this might be proof that you can platform release a film and spread word of mouth. I've heard multiple people talk about Farewell who didn't know existed 2 weeks ago. And it's just like, it's one of those things where it's organically getting spread through social media and Twitter and all that kind of stuff. And people are just talking about it on Slack. That's why I heard it. So I think they're going to keep expanding, but it's a very, very good performance for that movie. Also limited Art of Self-Defense. That got pushed out by Bleecker Street for some reason to over 500 theaters. Kind of DOA, sub $2,000 in 500 theaters. That's actually higher than I thought they would do. I thought maybe it'd be like $500 per theater if you push it out to 500 theaters. So it's not the worst performance in the world, but it's not going to break out. I don't know why they thought that it would. It's not really the type of platform art film that would break out. Also, in terms of limited, anything else to speak of? Not really. David Crosby, he's been in the news recently. Like he berated some podcaster this week, like a couple days ago, and it was all over Twitter. Probably it's like a PR move or something to get more publicity for his film. Platform release 4 theaters, New York, Los Angeles, only 10K. It's literally DOA. No one's gonna go see this thing. I think that's mostly it outside the top 10. Yeah, it's mostly it. Some older movies are like hanging on in the theater, like Dark Phoenix is still out there. It made 183K this weekend. So Dark Phoenix is going to close out under 70 million. It's going to close out at like 66, which is just the biggest train wreck of the year. Has to be. Late Night also looks like it's going to close out here pretty soon. Probably around 15 million. Also a huge train wreck, but for completely different reasons on a completely different level. Just bad. Apollo 11's still doing pretty good. $9 million. That's not bad at all for a documentary like that. And like Dumbo's still hanging on too. I don't know how. It's in like 65 theaters, but that's going to close out at about 115. Talk about a train wreck. I'm sure the Lion King and Toy Story and Aladdin money is going to make up for that loss. Okay, so that's it in terms of what is happening this weekend at the box office. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming up, because we are getting to the end of the summer here. Like Lion King was the last kind of hurrah of huge openings. Maybe you could say Hobbs and Shaw will be one, but we'll see. Next weekend is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I had my doubts about this doing well at all. Now I'm kind of switching because there is this weird buzz going on about it. It has next weekend wide open. It's great counter programming to Lion King. They're doing this super wide release over 3,500 theaters. I mean, I can't even tell you where it's going to end up. Maybe I would say 20 to 30ish. Somewhere in that range would make sense. If it goes above 30, I'd be really surprised and kind of impressed for a Quentin Tarantino movie like this. Yeah, I don't know why they're pushing out wide. I would platform this thing and then, get people to sort of buzz about it and then maybe push it out wider. But for some reason, Sony and Columbia want to push this thing. I mean, it's probably because Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio and Margot Robbie are the leads, and they feel like with them out front that they could get a wide release and get people to show up. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I don't really totally agree with it either. I don't see this doing or breaking out all that much. And then the weekend after, August 2nd, you have Hobbs and Shaw, obviously going to be massive. I don't know where that opens up. I would say 80 to 100 would be my guess, but it could plow through $100 million. No problem. That wouldn't surprise me all that much. But it's going to be very, very strong. And then August 9th, we have a big sort of glut of films. The Kitchen, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which looks terrible. Dora the Explorer, Brian Banks, I don't know that one, and The Art of Racing in the Rain. You have that's a really strong crop of movies to put out on August, the second weekend of August. And then the third weekend of August, we have a whole nother crop of movies. Good Boys, Blinded by the Light. These are all wide releases. 47 Meters Down, Uncaged, the sequel to 47 Meters. Who doesn't want to see that? I'm going to go see that. Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Kind of a smaller film from United Artists releasing, so it's going to do bad because they'll blow the release. That's on the 16th of August. 4 new wide releases, 5 new wide releases on the 9th, 4 on the 16th, Angry Birds movies on the 14th. So it's basically 5 on that second weekend as well. And then it starts to cool off a bit. And then, by the time we get to August 23rd weekend, that's the end of summer. The summer, it really ends essentially the second weekend, or third weekend of August in this case. So the 16th is kind of the last weekend. And then it, basically whimpers until Labor Day. Angels Fallen from Lionsgate. Is that Gerard Butler? Yeah, I think it is. That might do okay. That's a really good slap for that movie. That's like the perfect weekend for that movie because like it's going to be quiet. There's nothing going to be new coming out. And it's like throw that really ridiculous action movie out there and it might make like $25 million, $30 million opening weekend. Better than any other weekend probably that it could do. The 21st, Ready or Not from Fox Searchlight. Watch out for that one. I feel like it might break out. Seems like a kind of arty horror film. It's essentially to play out the most dangerous game. A woman goes to get married. It's a family secret. The family secret is that we're going to hunt you until we kill you. Pretty insane. It looks very over the top. Kind of like similar vibes to in tone as Happy Death Day to You. Very playful kind of slasher horror movie. So I think it has a very slight chance of breaking out. The problem for it is that if that was an October release, I would say, yeah, there's definitely a strong chance it'll break out. But sitting in that gutter slot, August 21st, summer is over. Everybody's going back to school, college, and under. And then people just get distracted, and then it's the end of summer, and just the box office collapses every year, the last 2 weekends up until Labor Day. So I just don't think it's going to have the environment to really break out. And then last weekend in August, you have Don't Let Go, another horror film, and then Playmobil to move from STX. STX, like I've been calling, I think they're actually in financial trouble now, and I don't know how long they're going to last. I don't know if they're going to last through the year. I've talked about STX so many times on this podcast, and we've walked through their movies. Like, you can't survive as a new studio unless you have, like maybe 1 out of 4 of your movies is a huge, pretty decent sized hit. And like they had nothing. They were like batting like 1 for 20 for a while. And it's just like you can't survive. And like the problem with STX is it's a quality problem. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know why they end up in those situations, but like the movies that they were putting out just were not good movies. And maybe there was a philosophy behind it of making these very middle brow, sort of almost direct to VOD type releases and pushing them out in the theater. I don't know what the thought process was, but they just did not buy or produce really good films, and now they're essentially going to go out of business, it sounds like. So that's the end of the summer, and then to kick off the fall, you have It Chapter 2, which, with the original opened up at like 120 something, I want to say, ish, maybe 117, like 120-ish something. The second one, it's 2 years from when that one opened. That opened up in September 2017. I saw it opening weekend, and that was the hype on that one was insane. Like the hype for the original you knew it was hyped when all the way through 2017 people would mention it randomly, whether online or just in person. It's like, oh, what are you going to see? What do you think about this new It movie? There's just something about like it was like pre-hype. And it just was nonstop up until that release. So it didn't surprise me when it like overperformed so dramatically. With this second one, I don't know how well people liked the first one. I thought the first one was not a good movie. I thought it was really well done for the production budget that they had, but the writing was all over the place. It didn't really seem that cohesive. The last 30 minutes I thought was a complete kind of shit show. Totally not scary at all. But people showed up, and I do wonder, I think, because like with a sequel like this, the type of hype, the new cast, you got Bill Hader, you got Jessica Chastain, you got a really good group of people who are playing these characters. But I just get the feeling that it's going to underperform the expectation and tracking. I don't know if you have long-term tracking on this now, but like 150 opening, I would guess, is where they're starting out to track this. I don't think it does 150. I think it does probably. The real question is, does it go below the first one? Which doesn't really make a lot of sense that it would. But like, I'm just getting a vibe that it's just not going to do 150. Maybe it does 120. Maybe it does 110. Maybe it doesn't even do 100. I don't know. I'm kind of lukewarm on it to really, really breaking out. It just doesn't feel like there's the same level of electric hype that you could just like feel in the air for the movie. But maybe I'm just misreading it. Maybe it does 150. So we'll see. That's essentially the start of the fall. And then you got The Goldfish, Hustlers, that trailer just dropped. Ad Astra, Rambo, 21 Bridges, The Hunt. There's all this stuff coming out in the fall, but that's the end of the summer. And then probably around the end of summer, on the last 2 weekends in August, I will do a sort of summer box office recap. So stay tuned for that. In any event, folks, thanks for listening. This has been the Wild Lion Podcast. I will be back next weekend. Thank you.